Testing. Oh, good, great. Good afternoon, everyone. So, first off, Dan, I appreciate the wide-angle view, right, in terms of the global wide-angle perspective, and the focus on the fact that building capabilities is all about practice. So I think it's a great segue in terms of Toyota Kata that that's in fact what we're going to be talking about today, is how to really bring it down to a practice level on a day-to-day basis. Is this as loud to you as it is to me? This sounds a bit booming, huh? Is it okay? Good, wonderful. Okay, so the topic today very simply is change, and the need to embrace it, really, the need to really understand what it takes to do it, and Toyota Kata as a means to manage in this kind of a dynamic environment that we're living in today. So I want to start by talking about my daughter. This is my daughter Lisa, my granddaughter Lauren, who's 6 years old. Lisa's a physical therapist, and she's been in pediatrics, has a specialty there for 13 years, and is one of those people that's very highly trained and usually pursued by headhunters, right? So she's constantly getting offers for new opportunities. We live in the Grand Rapids area, which has a very strong healthcare environment, but in the last 2 years, she's had 3 jobs, which is interesting, because she's not the type that's chasing more money, right? So I'd like to look at why this is going on. But before we get into that detail, I want to just take a step back in terms of the good old days, which many relate to as after the Second World War. And during that period of time, there were quite a number of isolated markets, limited critical inputs. Most of the inputs were really determined within the country or the market we were operating in. Workers, for the most part, had narrow skills and would generally be replaced. Organizations had sort of a silo focus, right? We operate within our areas of expertise, and there'd be periodic improvements from, from engineering or specialty departments. And let me just pull this out of the way. So in terms of life on a day-to-day basis, it had its ups and downs, and it would follow in some kind of a cyclical pattern, but the magnitude of change generally was small. And as Dan's already pointed to, the typical management style that emerged out of that was command and control. That was Taylor management style. Today, however, the world is quite a bit different. The global markets are clearly driving and impacting virtually everyone. There are multiple critical inputs that are completely outside of our control in terms of monetary exchange rates, climate change impacts, supply chain interruptions. Our workers are also becoming more multi-skilled. They're becoming cross-functional, more difficult to replace, more critical. Many organizations are matrixed, so we have a complex net of relationships to manage. And commonly, we have episodic improvements from CI groups, the Kaizen event, or other type of focused improvement effort. So we've gone from this kind of a world to this kind of a world. And what's happening is that the frequency of the change is increasing. But not only the frequency of the change, the magnitude of the change is increasing. And the tendency of where it's going is that both the frequency and the magnitude of change is accelerating. So we've got this command and control, though, management style that we've been practicing, that's really been deeply ingrained, deeply embedded. Most of us have grown up in that environment. So we're dealing with change at a colossal rate. And I'm going to attempt to get this going to just illustrate exactly how much change we really are dealing with.
right now, right here, 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 right now.
So what does it mean? It means we are living in incredibly dynamic, exponentially changing times. So that's good. There we go. Great. Thank you. And we're immersed in it. We're immersed in it. And everyone, I think, is feeling the impact of it, at least everyone that I communicate with in business and social environments. So in terms of this change, I want to get back to my daughter and the rest of the story. So her two earlier employers were well established, right? Had smaller companies. However, as Dan mentioned, budgets are tightening everywhere in terms of, federal funds, state funds, meaning less funding for her employers, meaning profit margins are shrinking, meaning increased documentation requirements are being heaped on all of the workers, which of course we can't actually, in terms of that increased workload for therapists and techs, and as a result we can't pay you, so more and more work comes home. Benefits wind up getting reduced. We have, quote, layoffs, which tend to be permanent, right, in terms of terminations. Morale declines, and the larger dominant provider in that marketplace basically hires Lisa to spearhead pediatric home care service and absorbs that other market share. So is this tale familiar at all? Any of you see this happening in terms of your markets, your world, your environment, right? This is what we're living in. This is the rate of dynamic change that we're personally involved in today. So when Dan talks about building capabilities, it's really building capabilities in terms of facing this kind of a dynamic, high change environment. So I want to see if we can make this a little more immediate in terms of what it takes to change. So I'm going to ask you to do an exercise. There are papers on the desks and pens. So if you would, we're going to simply practice writing our names. And if you would, take a sheet of paper and leave, when you start writing, please wait until I tell you, but once we begin, leave enough room to write your name about 10 times. So very quickly, if you would, just form pairs, A and B. Just match up two people, A and B. And if you would, all of you can get out, if you have something to measure time with, right? Your little smartphones or wristwatch, whatever it may be. Go ahead and get those out. And then please, let's identify the B. Who's the B? We have Bs identified? Good. Bs, you are going to do some timing first. Where are the As? A's you're going to write. So all I want you to do is, for the A's, you're going to write your name. And the B's are going to time you. And just do it 3 times. So A, if you would, write your name. B, you're going to time, okay? And we'll do that a total of 3 times, okay? So when you're done, when your pair is done, just raise your hands. That way we can see whether everyone's completed, okay? So A is going to write your name 3 times. B is going to record the time for each trial and record it. Is it clear? So go ahead and begin. When you're done, please raise your hand. Go ahead. Okay. Those that have completed, we good? Very good. Okay, now if you would, just switch roles. Okay, switch roles. Okay, those that have completed, hands up. Pretty much done? Okay, great, thank you. So what I want to point to here is that in signing your name, that's largely an unconscious habit. It's something that happens very, very quickly, and our brains basically create habits in order to free up our conscious thinking for other activities. So unconscious thinking, or habit-based thinking, it's fast, it's instinctive. It's very, very quick, and we can do it almost with no attention, okay? Much of what we do is habitual. Much of what we do is habitual, like crossing our arms, signing our names, etc. And habits are behaviors that have been repeated regularly. They occur unconsciously. And they are built in terms of our day-to-day life. And what happens, what we're discovering through brain research, is that habits basically form, there's a physiologic base for habits. The neural pathways in the brain get retraced. The more that we do something, the more that we repeat something, the stronger those neural pathways become. And as a result, we develop a fixed mindset based on these well-worn neural pathways, okay? The more often we do something, the more likely we are to repeat it. Signing our name is something we've been doing for ages, right? Very quick, no conscious attention is necessary. However, a pitfall of many habits is that the past experiences that created those habits don't necessarily represent future situations. And the rub is that we are being propelled into new situations that have never occurred before in the past. So we're being confronted with change that we've never seen before. So this fixed mindset that begins to form from constantly reinforced neural pathways winds up in keeping us in this zone of apparent certainty, because we derive a lot of our sense of security and confidence from certainty. We tend to seek it. The way the adult brain functions, we naturally strive to operate in a zone of apparent certainty, where things are rational, calculable, logical, familiar, risk-free. We expect things to go the way they know, as we expect them to go. So familiar habits such as driving our car, riding bicycles, your native language, typing, email, all sorts of stuff. right, is in this comfort area. And lots of things should go and should be as certain as possible. They should be familiar. So the green zone, you know, life's good in the green zone. We have comfort, familiarity, predictability, ease, and confidence. And what's also been happening over these 40 years is that we have developed and practiced this mindset of command and control management, where largely the senior executives set the vision, senior leaders produce the answers, and direct the masses who execute from above. Okay? This is very simply a management by results model that we've all been, at least have grown up in to some extent and have been exposed to and are familiar with. Problem is, today and in the future, we're faced with more and more of these challenges that are actually in the yellow zone. In terms of the sweep of time, and it's an accelerating sweep, we're going from life is good to life is a little more difficult, a little more difficult. Whereas the green zone, life is comfy. In the yellow zone, things are different. We have stress, effort, difficulty, unpredictability, mistakes, doubt. The other thing that happens though in the learning zone is, or in the yellow zone, is learning. Okay? This is where we actually innovate. This is where we actually generate new solutions to problems that we've never faced before. Because within the comfort zone, the reason that it's comfortable is that we're familiar with it. We already know how to operate in that space. But the solutions that we're going to have to generate in terms of our future problems are out here in this yellow zone. And it's not comfortable generally to be there. So now I just want to make a minor change so you can begin to get a sense of change as we begin to deal with it. So we'll do the exact same exercise, okay? So the B people, you'll be doing the timing. A people now, what I want you to do 3 times, write your name with your non-dominant hand. Use your other hand. And please get some data also. Okay, who's completed at this point? Can I see hands? Who's completed? Wow, we're getting there. Folks, very simply, if you would, just reverse the roles, so make sure both parties have practiced. So reverse roles so that everyone gets to write with their non-dominant hand. Good. Can I see hands, folks, in terms of who's done? Okay, we're pretty well getting there. Good. Go 1 more minute. Okay, so folks, if I could have your attention up here. So how did this feel, writing with the other hand? Right? All right. Heads are shaking, right? Uncomfortable, difficult, awkward. Why? Why? Why was it so difficult? No practice, right? No practice. There's a physiologic reason that it was difficult. And that's because we are operating on a neural pathway that has not been developed, okay? When we have well-trained neural pathways, it's easy to function that way, okay? And we were basically outside of our comfort zone. So our comfort zone it's not just a theoretical concept, all right? There's a physiologic base for it that has to do with how well we've practiced and whether neural pathways have actually been developed and reinforced within the brain. So in a trained synapse, right, and we have lots of them, in a trained synapse, there's an easier unobstructed flow of information across that electrical gap, which is what determines how our brains function, okay? The brain learns to prefer whatever we tend to focus on repeatedly. And whatever we practice repeatedly, we actually build mental neural pathways. The brain is only 3 pounds. It consumes 20% of the body's energy. And because untrained synapses require more energy to fire and maintain, the brain prefers to use these. But the rub is that innovating, creating, generating new solutions in terms of the challenges that we're confronted with requires us to function over here. Requires us to use neural pathways and creativity that we're actually not used to. So understanding this is really critical in terms of the way that we think, the way that we act, and the type of challenge that we're really up against when it comes to cultural change, when it comes to real behavioral changes in our own personal lives as well as at work. Because those routines at work are also well trained. We have trained synapses in terms of the company culture as it exists. So our dilemma today is that we're being increasingly confronted with the need to adapt and change, but our brains physiologically want to stay in the old behavior patterns. This is the rub, the dilemma. So I'm going to propose that Toyota Kata is a great way to manage in terms of this kind of environment that we're looking at. So the command and control management by results that we talked about, in terms of this kind of a structure, the accelerating rate of change that we're dealing with is overwhelming this historical style of managing. That if we're staying in that top-down control, we don't have the bandwidth to generate the level of change that's really necessary throughout the organization. So fundamentally, what needs to happen is the management system, in the regard of developing people, needs to change. So rather than a top-down directive style, part of what needs to happen is that the executives need to set a vision clearly. Senior leaders, management leaders need to provide coaching, and the masses of our organization find their own solutions that are aligned with that vision. And again, policy deployment clearly is a tool for being able to do that. But part of what has to begin to shift is the mindset of what senior leaders are doing in terms of enabling and empowering our people to solve their own problems. The old paradigm simply we don't have the bandwidth to be able to come up with every solution that the company's facing. So I propose Toyota Kata is really an ideal methodology to support this change in terms of this paradigm. So briefly, what I'd like to do is talk about the mechanism or the fundamental structure of Toyota Kata. A kata, very simply, is a routine that you practice until it becomes a habit. Okay? The word comes from martial arts, but it basically has to do with any routine that becomes second nature. So driving a car, practicing an instrument, sports, anything that we practice often enough that becomes unconscious in a routine is basically a kata. The core of Toyota Kata is routines. It is routines that we practice on a regular basis. There are two types. We call it the improvement kata, which is made up of 4 elements, and the coaching kata, which is made up of 1. The beauty of this model is that it's compact, it's extremely simple to learn, extremely simple to use and teach. It's consistent, easy to understand, and equally important to all of those is that it's very time efficient. Because in our busy days today, the biggest issue that many people face is finding the time to do anything, finding the time to manage any kind of a change initiative given the pressures and the demands that we're under. So what I'd like to do is take a couple of minutes just to explain each of these in a little bit greater detail, give you a sense of what this is all about. So the 4 of these routines together are called the improvement kata. The first one is understanding the direction. And as Dan pointed out, senior leadership really has to establish a vision for the customer. Where is the company going longer term? Oftentimes this vision is, it'll be vague, it'll be principle-based, such as 0 defects, 100% value added, 100% customer satisfaction. Those things may not be achievable, but they still serve as a direction. Challenge would be something more concrete and actually measurable, but this part of it needs to be done by senior leadership in terms of the direction and actually defining a longer-term challenge in the 1 to 3 year kind of a time frame. The challenge is really where it intersects with line management in terms of actually teaching this improvement kata to the organization and using that as a way to step forward to progressive target conditions until we ultimately fulfill that challenge. Okay? So this would be the vision piece of it, understanding long-term where we're going. The other reason that the vision is critical is without that vision, from whatever my current condition is, I could head virtually anywhere. Okay? So we need to have some kind of direction, some kind of focus in terms of setting the next target condition that's basically aligned with that vision. That'll help us getting there. Okay? As I mentioned, this is distant, typically 1 to 3 years out. The target conditions typically will be very short frame, anywhere from 1 week, literally, at the beginner stage, to as long as 3 months. But the bias is toward a short target condition and rapid PDCA cycles. And again, successive target conditions that move us toward that challenge. The second step The second routine is to grasp the current condition. The basic question there, what's our current pattern of working? And the purpose of this is to not uncover problems, waste, or potential improvements. So this is not a waste walk. The purpose of analyzing the current condition is done to obtain facts and data in order to define a next appropriate target condition. Okay? So our mission here in grasping the current condition is to really thoroughly understand what's happening today. And very often, what goes on in terms of continuous improvement efforts or any kind of improvement effort is we tend to jump to solutions without really understanding where we are today. This takes time, but it's a worthwhile investment. Doing so allows us to set an appropriate target condition, which is the next step in the journey. We have 5 steps of process analysis in terms of grasping the current condition. I'm not going to go into these in detail. Basically, what you see on the screen right now is targeted for discrete manufacturing. And we also have translated this into a much more simple set and generic set of questions for things outside of manufacturing, such as healthcare, such as engineering, such as administrative support, maintenance, et cetera. These kinds of questions are more generic, but the general thought process is exactly the same. So you could look at this as a mini kata. These are the routine 5 steps that we always go through in terms of trying to understand and grasp the current condition. Okay? And it's a systematic pattern that we can practice over and over again until it becomes habitual. The third step in the process, the third routine, is to establish this target condition. And we're basically here on the roadmap. The key question here is, what pattern do we want to have next? Where do we want to go from here? So the target condition simply describes where we want to be next. It is not how we are going to get there. And the thing about a target condition that makes it significant is it's beyond what we currently know how to do. It's beyond what we currently know how to do. If we're simply talking about something that I already know how to execute, I already know how to change the line balance in order to reduce labor, if I already know how to make these changes, that really wouldn't be an appropriate target condition. The target conditions we're talking about will stretch our people. They'll be in that yellow zone. They'll be beyond our current knowledge threshold. Okay? But it is where we want to be next. By setting this objective and then trying to hit it, we learn why we cannot. We learn what the obstacles are. Okay? So it's really a setup for scientific experimenting. It's a setup for scientific experimenting. And having a clear target condition that's driven by a date, by the way, and we do not keep pushing this date out and out and out because, you know what, we're not going to make it. We keep the date firm. But having that clearly there allows us to recognize the obstacles that we need to address. And often what takes place in a waste walk is we'll come up with a laundry list of 50 or 60 different things to do. Which one should we do? Don't know. The key question in terms of Toyota Kata is, what are the ones that we need to work on? So in this case, there'll be many things that we don't work on as we try to strive toward that target condition. And all of us are limited by our resources, time, energy, so having that kind of focus is really critical. A target condition, briefly, the key thing to know about it is that it's a multifaceted description of how we want the process itself to operate. And it's not just a target. All of these conditions need to exist simultaneously. So very often in terms of targets or outcome metrics, it's common that we'll state these goals as, I want to reduce inventory by 20%, we want to reduce lead time, we want a certain level of productivity, certain level of quality, and often those things are stated as a one-dimensional objective that we're shooting for. But the truth is, with any of these, you can't work on these directly. You can't work on these directly. These are all outcomes. In order to actually shift any of these, you have to go upstream. You have to work at the process level in order to shift output per hour, in order to shift quality levels, in order to shift machine reliability. This is where we have to focus. This is where the target condition describes exactly, in as much detail as we can, how this process will work. Okay? This is actionable. This is actionable. And the premise is that if we predict this process operating according to our target conditions, it will generate the outcome that we want. Okay? So it's really a wonderful tool for being able to focus at a process level to achieve the results, higher level objectives that really are cascaded from management in terms of that focus that we're looking for. Okay? So a target condition is a description of these circumstances. It's an operating pattern that we think is going to achieve these results. Without a target condition, often what happens is the great debate. We have my idea, your idea, right? And we battle it out. And usually whoever happens to be more convincing will win for a time until, of course, that may not produce the desired result. Then we get into the I told you so. So, you know, this battle is common. With a target condition, people literally, physically, can watch the body posture change where people will turn together, look toward the target condition. What do we need to work on in order to reach it? So it really is a phenomenal aid in terms of building teamwork within our teams. Okay? The fourth piece in terms of the improvement kata, last step, is this PDCA, or experimenting toward the target condition. Up until this point, even with these 3 steps, we actually haven't changed anything. It's basically been observing and planning. Once we get to the 4th step here, we actually begin the process of discovery. We begin the process of experimenting. So when one of the most important things to realize is that this path is going to be unclear. It's going to be unclear. If the target condition is really in that yellow zone, right, beyond our current capabilities, we don't exactly know what it's going to take to get there. We don't know what it's going to take to get there. So what's important is that the target condition is really a setup for experimenting. All right? It's a setup for experimenting at what we call our threshold of knowledge. Where's the limit between what I really know and then when I start guessing, and I think it's so, might be so, could be so, okay? So a target condition allows us to begin this journey through this gray zone of discovery, where we're going to be conducting rapid PDCA experiments and then adjusting as we go. That's what this jagged line indicates, is that as we learn, we make adjustments and we correct. So PDCA basically is a matter of testing, and when you know, our hypothesis is that, well, if we get things set up just so, we'll hit the bullseye. We'll take a shot at it. If we fail, we're going to get some feedback, okay? So it's only when things don't go as expected that we actually are able to learn. So having a hypothesis, having a theory, and then working to that, testing it, is what really allows us to develop new knowledge. The last piece in the process is the coaching process here. And these two function as a hand-in-glove pair in terms of the coaching and the PDCA. So the setup is basically we have a learner who's working with a process trying to improve it. We have a coach who's working with that learner, supporting that learner, understanding the mechanism, understanding the tools of Toyota Kata, but also helping that learner, in fact, achieve the target conditions there. Often it's going to be a manager and a supervisor. The supervisor owns the target condition. The manager is advising, supporting, and helping to teach that learner as well. Developing the capabilities. Developing the capabilities. For the coach, we have a 5-question card, a very clear, simple set of questions that have been distilled and refined over time, but extremely powerful set of questions. And this is often exactly where that card is. There's no secret to it. It's a known script. And practicing this set of questions over and over again builds those neural pathways, right? It develops it into a habit. For the learner, we have a cycle record like this. It's basically a very simple document for capturing the information from each experiment. And these two together are the heart of the coaching process. The coach always is using these 5 questions on the card. The learner always is using this PDCA cycle record. And every day, ideally, there's a coaching cycle that takes place. This is the heart of how you develop the capability. And very often, this is what we most often see missing in many organizations, is there is no coaching function. There is no structure for coaching to take place to develop the capabilities within people. So the key is to practice and have the coaching feedback, okay? This is what it looks like in real life. Very simple. It's messy, right? Documents, but that's the process. And it looks just that humble. So each of these steps, you know, we've often seen this kind of a diagram that PDCA experimenting one cycle leads to the next. Truth is, looks more like this, okay? It's actually a piece of spaghetti, but it is bounded. It is bounded. It's not just a wild set of stabbing and testing. There is a target condition. It has a set date and it's measurable. We're operating within budget limits. We're also operating within quality parameters. So the idea is not that we can simply conduct wild tests and put the product or the customer at risk. Okay, so there is a boundary, but this is really going to be the path. And we need that. Within this zone, we do not necessarily have to show a benefit every step. Failed tests are needed for learning. So we have to develop a capacity to experiment. And if we're really experimenting, we don't know what the result's going to be. We have to be open to something not working out so that we can increase our knowledge. Okay, so what we're really doing here is we're practicing patterns. We're practicing the improvement kata, the coaching kata, rigidly at first, so they become deeply ingrained, so they become automatic and reflexive. They no longer require a conscious attention, like playing a musical instrument, like driving the car, like signing your name, okay? We practice to become more comfortable in this learning zone. So right now, our current comfort in terms of facing this change, this dynamic change, we like to operate within these boundaries. What we're working to do is to expand that comfort zone so that we become comfortable facing the unknown. And this Toyota Kata methodology provides a very, very simple, practical mechanism for being able to do that in a way that actually develops the capability within the learners, okay? So our 40-year command and control practice, basically episodic events. We tend to focus typically on results, little or no coaching. Time frames are long. There's a tendency to procrastinate. We oftentimes have a grand slam mindset that we're going to do this thing and we're going to get it done once and for all perfectly. And often we'll have CI groups or task teams. Comparing the two, this would be daily interactions. It's not an event-based format. We're interacting daily. The focus is on, yes, results and skill development both. So we're trying, there's a dual objective here. The coach-learner relationship is critical. This is one of the most significant changes that we see in applying this. Daily experimenting with a bias for action and learning is a key piece of it. It does not need to take a long amount of time, 10 or 15 minutes in terms of these interactions. Successive target conditions working toward the challenge, not a grand slam, knock it out of the park. And senior leaders and line managers are actively engaged in the coaching process, okay? Actively engaged. So our organization, our culture of routines, habits, norms, the stuff that we do every single day, it builds this mindset, right? We keep reinforcing those neural pathways, writing with our right hand. Toyota Kata is really applied upstream here. It's deliberate, conscious practicing of a new routine. So if I were to ask you if we broke your dominant hand, not that I'd actually want to do that, but if it happened that you broke your dominant hand and you had to write with your left hand for 6 months, what do you think would happen? You'd get good at it. You'd get good at it because you'd have to practice. You'd have to practice. It's that simple. So kata is really a deliberate practicing of a new routine to develop neural pathways that enable us to deal with change. To deal with change, okay? So modular routines, time efficient, applicable everywhere. It is ultimately aligned to the vision. The key is it becomes part of our line management's daily work, and it's completely available to everyone in the organization, which is a wonderful thing. So the question is, are you really prepared to embrace change? Because it means building new neural pathways. And resources that are available here, Mike's website, Toyota Kata website, tremendous resource. Learning Network has about 1,300 people participating now who are answering questions live. You know, if you have issues, concerns, ideas, you can put them on there. People are responding to it. And there's also a quick start version of basically a tool for supporting people in practicing as quickly as you would like to. So, thank you.